Foodborne illness on cruise ships is reported at roughly triple the rate seen on land, and passengers over 65 make up a disproportionate share of the serious cases. Most people who board a ship never learn which specific stations carry that risk, because no one hands you a warning label at the buffet. If you are traveling with high blood pressure, a heart condition, blood thinners, or simply an immune system that isn't what it was at 40, this matters more for you than for the 25-year-old next to you in line. This comes from established shipboard food safety science, the same body of knowledge ship medical centers rely on every time they see a case walk through their door. Item number 14 on this list is a steakhouse dish that looks elegant on the menu and sends more older travelers to the ship's medical center than almost anything else on board. Let us get into it. Before I begin, I want to say something personal. Most people watching this are planning a cruise for themselves, or for someone they love. Maybe it's a retirement trip. Maybe it's an anniversary. Maybe it's the trip you've been saving for years. I made this channel for exactly that person, because nobody should spend their dream vacation dealing with problems that could have been prevented. If that's why you're here, hit subscribe right now. Because every single week, I put out information that protects your money, your health, and your experience on that ship, and I would hate for you to miss it before your sailing date. The Raw Bar looks like the most sophisticated station on the ship, and it is also one of the your itinerary treats with the least caution. Raw oysters and other raw shellfish carry Vibrio bacteria that a younger liver clears without much trouble, but for someone on blood thinners, with liver disease, or simply past 65, that same exposure can turn into a multi-day hospital stay. Cruise lines keep raw bars open because they are a premium draw, a signature of the included in your fare luxury feel, and pulling them would mean complaints from the majority of guests who never have a problem. The psychology at work is simple. A raw bar photographs beautifully and feels indulgent, so your guard drops exactly where it should be highest. Picture a traveler in his late 60s, sailing out of a Florida home port, who ordered the Oyster Tower on formal night and spent the next 2 sea days in the medical center, a visit that ran him close to $1,100 in onboard charges alone. A guest at the next table who simply asked for the cooked seafood option paid nothing extra and never lost a day of the cruise. Here is what you do. Skip the raw bar entirely if you're on blood thinners or have any liver condition, and ask specifically for the cooked preparation of any seafood dish that has one. The exact words to say are, "Could I get this fully cooked instead of raw, please?" The second station carries a version of the same risk with a twist. Sushi left sitting out. Made-to-order sushi stations look fresh because someone is standing there rolling it in front of you, but the fish itself often sits at room temperature for hours before your turn in line, well past the safe window. Ships hold sushi ingredients at proper refrigeration only until service begins, and once the station opens, temperature control becomes secondary to speed and presentation. That gap between prepared today and safe to eat right now is invisible to you, and that invisibility is exactly what makes it easy to overlook. The bridge sentence closes this section, but the pattern is already clear. What looks freshest is often what's been sitting longest. Under the heat lamp, mayonnaise-based salads are one of the most common overlooked risks for older travelers. Potato salad, egg salad, and chicken salad hold bacteria well once they leave true refrigeration, and buffet heat lamps are built to keep hot food hot, not to keep cold food genuinely cold. Kitchens prep these dishes in bulk hours before doors open, because a buffet has to look abundant the instant the line starts moving. Your mind reads cold salad as inherently safe, so you don't apply the same caution you would to, say, unrefrigerated meat, and that mismatch between what looks safe and what actually is safe is the exact gap that causes trouble. Consider a couple in their early 70s from a UK home port sailing who both had chicken salad on day 3 and spent their Norwegian fjord day in their cabin instead of on deck, losing what they'd call the best excursion of the whole trip. A traveler seated across from them who chose the freshly grilled chicken option that same day never missed an hour of the itinerary. Here is what you do. Check whether a mayonnaise-based dish looks freshly restocked or has clearly been sitting, and when in doubt, choose the grilled or hot station version instead. The exact words to say are, "Is this a fresh batch or has it been out a while?" The next station seems harmless because it's for dessert, and that's exactly the problem. Soft-serve ice cream machines are self-service, which means no crew member is monitoring how many hands touch that lever every hour. These machines have internal parts that are difficult to fully sanitize between cleanings, and biofilm can build up inside the mechanism over the course of a week-long sailing. The appeal is that it's free, it's unlimited, and it feels like a harmless treat, so almost no one thinks to ask when it was last cleaned. That "it's just ice cream" instinct is precisely the psychological blind spot that makes this one worth knowing. This next one hits closer to home than you think, because it happens at the one meal almost everyone treats as completely safe: breakfast. Runny yolk eggs at the omelette station carry salmonella risk that a fully cooked egg does not, and for an older immune system, that risk is meaningfully higher than it is for a 20-year-old. Made to order sounds like a guarantee of freshness, but made to order and cooked all the way through are two different promises, and only one of them protects you. Cruise chefs default to a soft restaurant-style yolk because that's what most guests request, which means the safer, fully cooked version is available, but you have to ask for it by name. The psychology here is trust in presentation. A chef standing in a tall white hat in front of you feels like a guarantee, when really it's still just an ingredient decision you need to make yourself. Here is what you do. Request your eggs cooked hard every time without exception. The exact words to say are, "I'd like that cooked all the way through, no runny yolk please." High-sodium specialty broths are the second risk at this same meal, quietly working against anyone managing blood pressure. Specialty soups and bone broths at breakfast and lunch buffets are often built with concentrated stock for flavor, and that concentration means sodium levels can run several times higher than a home-cooked version, without any menu warning. What comes next is the one that most people never think to ask about until it's already too late. Quick pause here. If you are realizing how much of this you did not know before today, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second and it helps get this information in front of other people who need to see it before their next sailing. Now, the next 3 secrets are the ones that took the most convincing to get former insiders to talk about. Let us keep going. Overnight buffet leftovers being quietly reserved the next morning is a practice most passengers assume doesn't happen on a ship this size. Large format dishes like casseroles or bulk prepared sides sometimes get held overnight rather than discarded, because food waste on a 7-day sailing carrying 4,000 guests is a real cost line the company tracks closely. Reheating can kill some bacteria, but not the toxins certain bacteria leave behind once they've had time to multiply. So, it's hot now doesn't mean it's safe now. That's the psychological trap. Heat feels like a fresh start, when in food safety terms it often isn't. Picture a widow in her late 60s sailing solo out of a Mediterranean port who had the breakfast straight at 2 mornings in a row and spent 48 hours confined to her cabin, missing both scheduled port days entirely. Days she'd saved for 18 months to sea. A traveler who stuck to items clearly prepared fresh that morning lost 0 days and $0. Here is what you do. Ask whether a buffet dish was prepared today, and favor items coming straight off a visible hotline rather than a chafing dish that's been sitting since doors opened. The exact words to say are, "Was this prepared this morning?" The second risk in this section shows up only on certain itineraries, and it hides in something as simple as a garnish. Raw vegetable garnishes on itineraries stopping in ports with less rigorous water treatment can carry contamination from wash water rather than the ship's own galley. This isn't a ship-wide issue, but on specific routes through developing region ports, produce loaded on board mid-cruise may have been rinsed locally before it ever reaches the ship's kitchen. Crews trust their suppliers by contract, not by testing every leaf personally. And that trust is reasonable most of the time, but not something you can verify from your seat at dinner. Consider a retired teacher from a Canadian city on a South American sailing who developed a stomach illness after a garnished appetizer on a port-heavy itinerary, with a shipboard treatment bill north of $600. A dinner companion who asked for garnishes on the side and skipped them on port, heavy legs paid nothing and felt nothing. Here is what you do. On itineraries through less regulated ports, request dishes without raw garnish, and favor cooked vegetable sides instead. The exact words to say are, "Could I get that without the raw garnish, please?" The final item in this section involves something with a flame attached to it, and it's more dangerous than it looks. Alcohol flambéed desserts like bananas Foster can pose a real interaction risk for anyone on blood pressure medication, blood thinners, or certain heart medications, because the alcohol content, even after flaming, is higher than most guests assume. The flame burns off some alcohol but not all of it, and the dish is often finished tableside specifically for spectacle, which means portion and pour aren't standardized the way a printed recipe would suggest. The show itself is the psychological hook. A lit dessert feels celebratory, not medical, so nobody at the table is thinking about drug interactions while it's happening. Think that is bad? Wait until you hear what comes next, because the final 3 items on this list are the ones ship medical staff say they see the most often. Deep-fried appetizers cooked in oil that's been reused across multiple sailings carry elevated trans fat content, which matters more for cardiovascular health at 65 than it did at 30. Reusing frying oil is standard cost control in high-volume kitchens, and it's not illegal or even unusual, but repeated reuse breaks oil down chemically in ways that affect heart health over repeated exposure across a cruise. Because the food still tastes crisp and familiar, there's no sensory clue telling you the oil is old, so the psychological cue you'd normally rely on simply isn't available here. Picture a retired engineer from a German homeport sailing who ordered fried appetizers at nearly every dinner across a 2-week cruise and left the ship with blood pressure readings his own doctor flagged as concerning at his post-cruise checkup. A tablemate who rotated toward grilled or baked appetizer options instead had no such follow-up visit at all. Here is what you do. Alternate fried appetizers with grilled or baked options, and ask your server which items are prepared in fresh oil that day. The exact words to say are, "Is this cooked in fresh oil today, or the fryer that's been running all week?" The next station involves something almost everyone assumes is simply water, and it isn't always. Ice used in poolside and bar cart drinks comes from the ship's own water system, and while main dining rooms are held to strict monitoring, poolside stations on some itineraries see less frequent testing simply due to volume and staffing. For most guests this is a non-issue, but for anyone with a compromised gut or on immune-suppressing medication, inconsistent ice quality at a satellite bar is worth a second thought. The convenience of a pool bar makes it feel like an extension of the main dining room, when operationally it's a much less monitored environment. Here is what you do. If you have any immune concern, request canned or bottled beverages without ice at poolside bars specifically. The exact words to say are, "Could I get that without ice, please?" The final item before the highest stakes section involves a board of food that looks perfectly innocent sitting in the sun. Charcuterie boards left out at poolside bars or evening cocktail hours often sit unrefrigerated for extended periods, especially in warm weather itineraries. Cured meats are more shelf-stable than fresh meat, but more stable is not the same as safe indefinitely, and a board sitting in direct sun for 2 or 3 hours crosses that line quietly. The presentation, wood board, garnish, soft lighting, signals quality and care, and that signal is exactly what makes people skip the more useful question of how long it's actually been sitting there. What comes next is the one that former insiders told me they were most uncomfortable sharing. Cut melon and fruit platters left uncovered at room temperature are one of the highest risk items on any ship, because melon's flesh is a near-perfect environment for listeria growth once it's been cut and exposed to air. Ships prepare large fruit platters early in the morning to have them ready for the entire breakfast and lunch service window, which can mean 6 or more hours of uncovered exposure by the time you're served. Listeria specifically targets older adults and anyone immunocompromised far more severely than it affects younger, healthier guests, which is precisely why this item sits near the top of every ship medical team's actual watch list. Consider a grandmother in her late 60s from a French port-of-call sailing who became seriously ill after a cut melon platter mid-cruise and required evacuation to a shore hospital, a medical transfer that cost her family close to $9,000 once flights and treatment were totaled. A cabin mate who stuck to whole, uncut fruit she peeled herself paid nothing and never left the ship. Here is what you do. Favor whole fruit you peel yourself over pre-cut platters, and if you do take cut melon, take it early in a meal service window rather than late. The exact words to say are, "Do you have any fruit that hasn't been pre-cut?" The second to last item is the one I mentioned at the very start of this video. Steakhouse beef tartare, served raw and seasoned tableside in the specialty restaurant, is one of the most consistent sources of onboard medical center visits among older travelers, and it rarely gets flagged the way raw seafood does because it's marketed as a premium, upscale dish rather than a raw one. The specialty restaurant setting itself creates a false sense of extra safety. Higher price, white tablecloth, a dedicated chef, none of which changes the fact that the beef is raw and handled with the same bacterial risk as any uncooked protein. That price equals safety assumption is one of the most common blind spots on the entire ship. Picture a retired executive in his early 70s from a Gulf Coast home port, who ordered the tartare on his anniversary night in the specialty steakhouse and spent his final 2 sea days in the ship's clinic instead of at the farewell dinner he'd looked forward to for months. His wife, who ordered the same cut cooked medium, never missed a single event. Here is what you do. In any specialty restaurant, request your protein cooked, even when the dish is designed to be raw. The exact words to say are, "Could I get this seared instead of raw, please?" The final item on this list is the quietest one, and it surprises people the most. Unpasteurized artisan cheeses on specialty cheese boards can carry listeria risk in the same way raw melon does. And cheese boards are treated as a sophisticated, low-risk indulgence precisely because they feel like the opposite of risky food. Artisan and imported cheeses are often selected for authenticity and flavor rather than pasteurization status. And menus rarely specify which cheeses on the board are unpasteurized. For an older immune system, that single unlabeled detail is the entire risk. Here is what you do. Ask directly which cheeses on any board are pasteurized before you eat them. The exact words to say are, "Which of these cheeses are pasteurized?" You now know all 15 of the specific foods and stations that carry real risk on a cruise ship, and more importantly, you know exactly what to ask for at each one in the moment, without slowing down your meal or drawing attention to yourself. That's not a passenger anymore. That's an informed traveler. Someone who enjoys every plate on the ship precisely because they know which ones to adjust and which ones to skip. There are 2 kinds of people at that buffet line. One who eats on instinct and hopes for the best, and one who asks 2 or 3 simple questions and sails through the entire week without losing a single day to the ship's medical center. You deserve to spend your cruise on deck, in port, and at dinner with people you love, not in a cabin recovering from something that was entirely avoidable. If you found this useful, the next video covers the 12 onboard charges that quietly appear on your final account statement that almost no one catches until they're already home. And if you're sailing again soon, you'll want to see it before your next embarkation day.